Lanyan is the brand new 4-star available for free from the Lantern Right Selector this patch. I've tested her in all her best archetypes at both Constellation 0, Constellation 2, and Constellation 4 to help you decide if you should get her and how to make the most out of her if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. We are giving away a free 5-star character away of your choice in partnership with Tactor. I've just posted an article on there of which characters are worth crowning for every single character. So make sure to check that out down below and comment to enter the giveaway for free. There's some other great articles that are really useful for brand new players that you can send to your friends or for you to read yourself. Check them out down below. Lanyan is an Anemo Catalyst user. She creates a shield with her skill and has a little bit of grouping with her burst. Her normal attacks are quite close range, but due to her shield, she is still a competent driver. If you use her as a driver, you'll want to level her 1090 to maximize her swirl damage, but I don't really recommend this. Leaving her at level 80 unascended is probably the best bang for your buck middle ground investment level. You'll want to prioritize leveling her skill because that is where her shield comes from. Unfortunately, to get it past level 6, she requires the same weekly boss materials as Mawika, so I only was able to test her at level 6 as Mawika got all my materials. More about this later. You can level her burst, but it's not necessary. It might be a little bit more relevant to do so if you're using her on some kind of team with Faruzan, as then her damage might not be as negligible, but I think most people can leave this very safely at level 1 and dedicate all of your resources to making the shield stronger. You're pretty much never going to want a set other than VV, unless of course, again, you're using her on some sort of Xiao team with Faruzan, in which case some sort of supportive set like Noblesse is what you're going to want to use. Tenacity will not work with this character. For her constellations, her C1 is basically irrelevant, just a tiny bit more damage. C2 is the big one. The way Lanyan's shield works, well, it works like a normal shield, but with her C2, your character's normal attacks can restore the shield strength. So as long as the shield doesn't completely break, this constellation will be a lot stronger. I found this already useful even with my low level 6 talents. I can imagine this constellation becoming even better, obviously only on teams that do normal attacks such as Arlecchino, Clorand, much less useful on characters that use charge attacks such as Linear or Neuvillette, but for characters that do use normal attacks, especially as you get her to a higher investment level, this constellation is really, really good. However, her shield strength is pretty darn good even at Constellation 0, so I definitely don't recommend pushing your luck unless you actually want the 5 stars on this banner. But if you do happen to get C2, know that it's quite a good constellation. C3 is quite good because it gives her shield extra levels, which will make her shield quite a bit stronger. And the more you invest into her shield, the less likely it is to break in one hit, which give the more chances you get to restore the shield strength. So this helps it be pretty much unkillable. C4 is her last excellent constellation that gives all of your party members 60 elemental mastery, which makes her much closer to a buffing character like Sucrose, which will be her main point of comparison. This constellation is excellent for vaporized teams especially. It's less useful on Electrocharge teams. It's also good for Aggravate teams. Overall, quite a good constellation, but all the way at C4, it's only 60 elemental mastery. Like 60 elemental mastery is good and it does make a difference, and I'll show you exactly how much of a difference it makes in my testing, but it is relatively small compared to the overall usefulness of her kit at Constellation 0. So once again, I don't recommend pushing for this constellation. C5, not very useful, and C6 gives her shield 1 additional charge, which in pretty much all teams won't really matter. I think Neuvillette might be the only one, sometimes Arlecchino, but generally speaking, her shield already lasts 12.5 seconds, which, although not the longest, is generally long enough for most teams, and with good investment into your skill level, she is good enough right there. I did forget to talk about artifact stats. You'll want to build attack, attack, attack on this character, and she doesn't need ER unless you're running Noblesse. But Viridescent Venerer on triple attack is going to max out her shield strength, and I found that very good. One thing to keep in mind that I forgot to do is if you're using the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, which is her best weapon, then you do want to actually level it up. Normally you don't have to level it up, but by giving her more base attack, she's going to get more total attack and therefore get more shield strength. I forgot to do this, and I found her shield still useful, so something to keep in mind if you're used to using a low level Thrilling Tales, since base attack doesn't usually matter. I also did some testing specifically specifically on how long Lanyan's shield will last, both at C0 talent level 9 investment levels, as well as utilizing her C2 where the normal attack refreshes. The Lanyan that I used is Constellation 3, but only talent level 6, so we're essentially testing a Constellation 0 but talent level 9 shield. Put up next to Zhongli's shield, it is weaker when not using normal attacks to refresh, but if you are using normal attacks, at least against this Abyss monster, which does hit pretty hard, her shield does outlast Zhongli, which is very impressive. The first team I want to talk about is Vaporize. So this will be for characters such as Arlecchino, yoimiya, Hu Tao, Linny, and I guess Moeka Vaporize if you're running her on Vaporize. And I think the best way to talk about Lanyan here is that she's like Sucrose with a shield. Sucrose is the highest damaging option on these Vaporized teams, since she can pass Thrilling Tales and share Elemental Mastery, but oftentimes you're going to find her very hard to use as she obviously offers no survivability. Hence, a lot of people choose to use Kazuha and run Mono Pyro with Zhongli or something like that on Arlecchino, but Lanyan gives you a shielded Vaporized team, which is honestly pretty huge. I did some damage comparisons. So for example, this is a Vaporize for Arlecchino. In this Abyss, remember there's a big normal attack bonus, but we're doing a comparison, so it doesn't matter too much. I would say it slightly favors more buffs because it'll make the damage difference bigger. So the characters that give buffs are more shown off because of this buff. But Sucrose with this setup did 308,000 damage with Arlecchino's normal attack, and Constellation 0 Lanyan was able to get 259,000. So a fairly significant difference, but given that Lanyan is a shielder, this is still quite an impressive number. Things get more exciting if we use Lanyan C4, now reaching 294,000. So that's 60 EM playing quite a big role here. These are my Arlecchino stats, by the way. I have 154 EM as a baseline with this crit ratio, and this is my overall artifact stat line. I have a lot of EM and attack subs, so these artifacts are really, really high quality when looked as a whole. And in case you're curious, this is the number for Kazuha. So actually a bit behind Lanyan without her C4. Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer is just that broken. That's the reason why it's so different. So overall, all this put together, in practice, what does this mean? Well, if I'm going to be using a Vaporized team, it's going to be Lanyan, regardless of whether she's C0 or C4. I mean, obviously, ideally C4 eventually, but even at C0, being competitive with the top characters and providing a shield is just frankly too good. Keep in mind, to get the swirl, I had to actually use Yelan skill and burst first before using Arlecchino's skill, then using Bennett's skill and burst to apply pyro, then swirl with Lanyan's skill, and then swirl Hydra with her normal attack. That is how you want to do the rotation, and then pass the Thrilling Tales to Arlecchino. So yeah, Lanyan upgrade in Vaporize, awesome. However, it's not all completely sunshine and rainbows for Lanyan. I still do technically prefer Xiaolonen on this team. It's easier to set up, it lasts in multi-wave, it more easily buffs Yelan, the buffs last longer, and Xiaolonen's damage is also very comparable. Granted, this is R1 Xiaolonen, whereas Lanyan is using Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer, which is absolutely free. And Lanyan also provides a shield. So overall, I think different people might prefer different things. I think any Abyss that has multi-wave, Xiaolonen should be a bit better. But even then, with characters like Arlecchino, you can always switch out and swirl again and re-up the swirl. So yeah, overall, even though I might prefer Xiaolonen from just like a comfort, quality of life perspective, Lanyan might still be the superior character here, and that is just amazing. You love to see it. I think the only place where it's not total sunshine and rainbows is that Melt is sort of better now, but it is much more expensive. So if you are to replace Lanyan and Yelan with Xiaolonen and Citlali, this team is just much better. It's just a much better team. It's easier to play, and it still has a shield. And it still uses Thrilling Tales from Citlali. I think this is why Genshin is comfortable releasing Lanyan for free right now, because they know that the premium option is still quite a bit better than the free-to-play option with Lanyan. but the free-to-play option is still really, really good. And remember, you don't have to use Yulan. You can use Xingqiu, and you don't lose a ton of damage. Xingqiu will also make your Lanyan shield stronger and allow you to vape a little more in AoE. So overall, big win for Vaporize. I do have a bit of a bone to pick with Aggravate teams. This is not a Lanyan specific thing, but just Anemo characters in general on Aggravate teams, I'm not a fan of very much. Mostly it's because characters like Kale and Nahida are some of the better Anemo or Dendro buffer type of characters. Like Kale gives 60 EM, Nahida gives lots of EM and buffs through tenacity. Obviously, normally I like to use Kirara on these teams because she doesn't apply nearly as much Dendro as these characters, but you don't need the shield, so I wanted to go with something that could give us a bit more buffing. But Kale and Nahida just apply too much Dendro for Lanyan to swirl afterwards. And this means that you can't run Thrilling Tales, you have to play like something like Hakushin Ring. And you also get a shorter VV uptime because then you have to apply Dendro after the Anemo. So for Anemo, Aggravate, I really do prefer something like Xiaolonen. And then you can get away with something like Kirara. And with a healer and a shielder on your team, and Kirara applying Dendro in multi-wave with her C4, overall, this is by far my favorite Aggravate team. And unfortunately, I just really didn't enjoy Lanyan in the Aggravate team. I did use Lanyan with Kirara, so it is redundant on the shield front because both shields break at the same time, but it did still work. So yeah, Lanyan is fine for Aggravate, but I still don't prefer it. I prefer Xiaolonen, and to that I even prefer Chevreuse more than that. And this applies, obviously I did most of my Aggravate testing with Chlorand, but this applies the same way to Yaimiko, Keqing, etc. I did think that Electrocharge was pretty cool. On this team, you can get the double swirl pretty easily, and you can pretty easily pass Thrilling Tales to Chlorand, and Chlorand acts as your healer for your Farina stacks. You're not maxing stacks or anything, but she is still acting as a healer, and with Lanyan, you're not taking too much unnecessary damage. So overall, I was a fan of this team. Do I like it as much as Xiaolonen? No, because again, I prefer the multi-wave of Xiaolonen, and the additional healing on Xiaolonen gives you overall more Farina stacks, but still, I really did like this team. I loved Neuvillette with Lanyan though, speaking of Hydro. You're obviously not passing Thrilling Tales, so I did my testing with Fav on Lanyan. But number one, you can use Hakushin Ring if there's an Electro character around, but better if you have Citlali's weapon, you can use that here. I don't recommend pulling Citlali's weapon just for this composition, but if you have it, you can use it. I don't know why you wouldn't using Citlali here, but I digress. I found I got the exact same clear time with this team as I did with replacing Lanyan with Citlali. So if you want to use a shielded team with your Neuvillette, I absolutely love Lanyan here. This will obviously be quite a bit worse than the one where you use Citlali and Moika instead of Farina, but that's fine. This team is also great because you can reapply Lanyan's shield if you have her C6 when you do your second swirl. But aside from the C6, and it's not a big deal. Not having the shield for a couple seconds for Neuvillette, it's not a huge deal at all. So the nice thing is that none of her constellations basically do anything for this team. C0 Lanyan's amazing for Neuvillette. So I got better results with this team than the Kazuha version, even though Kazuha buffs the team slightly more because Lanyan gives you the shield, you're taking less damage with Neuvillette and not getting interrupted. So overall, my clear time was slightly faster with this team than with the Kazuha one, because it's more consistent, because you don't have to always dodge with Neuvillette. And this will be definitely better than a Zhongli team because you're just getting more buffing out of Lanyan's VV swirl than you are from Zhongli. So overall, I'm super, super, super happy with this team. I definitely think that she's overall an upgrade over Kazuha for Constellation 0 Neuvillette. Obviously, once you get C1, there's no reason to use Lanyan over Kazuha, but at Constellation 0, this is awesome. I want to talk a little bit about Xiao teams. Obviously, this is not going to be best in slot for Xiao because you're going to want to use Shen Yun. Farina Shen Yun is an amazing pairing for Xiao, and you really want to use them together. But if you don't have Farina Shen Yun, but you do somehow have C6 Farazan, seems unlikely. But if you do, you can do Farazan, then Bennett, and then Lanyan is providing a shield, animal particles, and Thrilling Tales for your Xiao. So that's pretty neat. It's not going to be best in slot, but some people back in the day used to use Sucrose for their Xiao, for the animal particles and for Thrilling Tales. So being able to use Lanyan as a shielder is pretty good. And you're still using Bennett. So you're still getting, good value out of Farazan, Bennett, and Lanyan is giving decent value. This is, again, the team that you'll want to use Well, you can't really use Noblesse because Bennett's going to be using Noblesse. Maybe you're using Bennett on Song of Days Past or Clam or something for extra damage. Probably not Clam, but maybe Song of Days Past. Final team is Mualani, and I actually like this. I know I haven't been a fan of Animo in Mualani teams before because you actually, one of my main problem with it is that you normally want to skill with your Shalona and skip the burst, because if you burst, you will react with all of the hydro on the enemy, and you won't be able to swirl with Lanyan, with the Animo. But with Lanyan, and this is a problem because sometimes you take damage and you do want to burst. But with Lanyan, you don't take nearly as much damage because you have a shielder. So you could even, I didn't do this, but you could even Archaic Petra Shalonin, VV Lanyan, and then scroll Moika. Or you can, do Moika for damage. And you can use Shengling here, obviously, as well. But overall, I got good results from this team. I liked it a lot. And if you do run her on Fav, you can time it so she crits passing the particles to Shengling, which can help with Shengling's energy needs as well. You want to consider a crit rate circlet if you don't have crit rate substats instead of just building full attack. So yeah, I think Lanyan is a good Mualani partner. I think she's more consistent than Citlali in this role because she doesn't apply an unhelpful detrimental element. So I think this is one of the better Mualani teams. You have to try the Petra scroll with Moika thing. I think that could be pretty cool. I just tried it. I couldn't get that Petra thing to work because by the time you get to Moika, you can't activate scroll because all the hydro is gone. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. There's probably something cool you can do, but for now, we're just going to move on. But good for Mualani. Everyone is probably wondering where Taser Driver Lanyan is. What about using her on field? What about her super cute normal attacks? Unfortunately, this team just kind of sucks. I'm sorry. And it doesn't matter whether you use Ron, or if you use Beto, or if you switch her on for Fischl, or yeah. Taser just doesn't do enough damage. In AoE, it's like fine, but you're gonna miss grouping from Sucrose. Lanyan not having as much grouping is kind of nah, and overall it just doesn't do any damage. I'm sorry. I'm really scared for Mizuki. Could you make, in all, like, being a bit more, like, less, inflammatory with my language, the team is fine-ish, but I would never recommend someone build it, because you're gonna have to really invest into your Xingqiu, really invest into your Fischl, really invest into your Ron, and that is just a lot of investment for a team that is very mediocre, aggressively mediocre. Okay, but for for overworld, whatever. But unironically, I think this would be better. And then you've got a shielded. If you want to drive with Lanyan, you've got a shielded, very competent driver character. I think this would be better than Electrocharge. Obviously, you're having 3 broken characters, but Lanyan's still driving and she's still VV, so she's got a shield. Yeah. If you want to use her on field, do something like this, I guess. Is there anyone I missed? I don't think so. We got Neuvillette. I mean, you could do the same things I did for Neuvillette with Ayato. Everything I said applies to Linny, yoimiya, Hu Tao. It should be especially great for yoimiya because yoimiya especially needs a shield. So really nice time to be a yoimiya main with both Citlali and Lanyan giving buffs. I don't really like her with Melt, obviously, because both Citlali and Lanyan are competing for Thrilling Tales. You could theoretically do this and run Lanyan instead of Shalonin. You're gonna get very small uptime on VV, but you could put Lanyan on Citlali's weapon and then put Citlali on Thrilling Tales and then swirl with Lanyan, then Bennett burst, then Citlali skill and burst, then burst with Moika. That actually should be pretty good, but because the VV buffs are so short, it's not ideal, but it still should be pretty good because Moika does the majority of her damage from her burst, and so Lanyan will be buffing the burst. This will be much worse than Shalonin, but still something you can do if you don't have Shalonin. Overall, what do I think of this character? Well, I think she's great. I think she's really, really awesome. And the fact that she's a free staple from the 4-star selector, you can't get Sucrose for free. And so Lanyan is perfect as a free character. She is an incredible staple. No, she's not tier 0, I don't think. But I honestly think she's the best Animo character overall. And I know that that's crazy to say, but if you think about it, most of the characters that Kazuha is best with are buffed by Thrilling Tales. It's basically just Neuvillette, and Neuvillette can really use that shield. A lot of characters can really use that shield. an Anemo shielder is just a very, very valuable role. I think Lan Yan is an upgrade over Kazuha and Sucrose, especially if you consider her C4, where she is almost as good of a buffer as Sucrose. Not quite, but providing the shield, I think, just makes her so much better. And then her Thrilling Tales plus her EM buff gives her more value than Kazuha and Vape Teams, and so Kazuha's left with basically just mono element teams, but usually the shield is valuable. So I would put her like just slightly above Kazuha. For wherever you put Kazuha on the tier list, I would put Lan Yan slightly above. I guess that gives away that I don't have Kazuha in tier 0 anymore. And because right now the meta, the strongest teams in the game are Citlali teams or Xiaonan teams, and Anemo just isn't as good. Viridescent Venerer is really annoying to use. It has a really short uptime. It doesn't work in multi-wave. You have to swirl each enemy to get the buff on each enemy. That is where Kazuha has value, but grouping for the last almost year of Spiral Abysses hasn't been relevant at all, like barely relevant at all. So I would prefer Lan Yan's very minimal grouping from her burst over Kazuha's grouping. If grouping becomes very important again, then Kazuha will be better than Lan Yan. But right now, I would prefer the shield. So they're basically, you know, they're basically the same in terms of overall value, but right now the meta favors Lan Yan. And I also love how free-to-play friendly she is. Thrilling Tales being such a broken weapon and her being a free character and having good constellations but not required constellations is just awesome. So most people, I would say, are definitely like you know whether you need her based on, you know, what teams I talked about and which were good. But yeah, Lan Yan delivered. Great job, Hoyoverse. And I think that the reason why they were comfortable releasing such a strong free character is that Xiaolona and Citlali are kind of her but better. Their buffs apply in multi-wave, their buffs apply to every enemy, they're much easier to use, their buffs last a lot longer, their buffs work regardless of, especially looking at Xiaolonan, like regardless of whether they're an attack scaler or not. So yeah, Xiaolonan and Citlali better, but Lan Yan still crazy awesome. If Lan Yan held like the Natlin artifact set instead of VV, for example, then I would think that she'd be on the level of Citlali and Xiaolonan. It's just that VV is basically just not as nice to use as the new sets these days. So yeah, Lan Yan, incredible character, truly incredible character. Very, very pleased with her. And she performed well on teams that, it's not even Thrilling Tales just that carries her. She performed well in the Neuvillette teams and the Mualani teams. So basically everywhere you would want her to perform, she delivered. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you're going to pick her for free from your selector, and you don't need to worry about getting more copies of her from these banners. You can wait till she's on a banner that you want better to get her C2, C3, C4. So yeah, make sure to check out the Tactor article down below to enter for the free character, and subscribe while you're at it. It really helps the channel. But if you don't want to do any of those things, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
We need to keep honing our skills to become as light and swift as a swallow.